The first man at the laundromat door gave a retired Kuroda security phrase and expected the lock to open. Instead, the woman behind the glass answered with his legal name, his former police registration number, and the exact time he had stepped onto her property. Upstairs, Riku Kuroda listened with one hand pressed against his bleeding side and understood that the stranger he had ordered to hide him knew more about his organization than some of his own lieutenants. What he did not understand was why men who had killed for his family were suddenly afraid to cross her threshold. If you're listening from somewhere in the world tonight, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. 42 minutes earlier, Riku had believed Rowan and Steam was nothing more than an old emergency address. That assumption had made sense when the message arrived. His sedan had been forced off its planned route near the port after a delivery truck stalled across 2 lanes at exactly the wrong intersection. The second vehicle carrying his security detail had been diverted by a false collision report. By the time Riku's driver realized the traffic signal ahead had been manually overridden, another car had already boxed them against a concrete service barrier. There had been no prolonged attack. That was what bothered him. Whoever planned it had wanted separation confusion and access to the encrypted phone carried in the front console. Riku's driver had taken a blow to the head during the escape. Riku had been cut beneath the ribs by broken glass and something sharper he never saw clearly. The phone disappeared. His personal fixer, Hiro Tanabe, managed one final transmission through a secondary channel before going silent. Rowan and Steam. Ask for Celeste. No explanation. Riku had spent his adult life learning the hidden geography beneath Yokohama's respectable surface, private clinics that asked no questions, apartments held under shell companies, warehouses whose back rooms belonged to men with no official titles. An old laundromat fit the pattern. He reached it shortly after midnight. Fluorescent light washed over rows of industrial machines. A woman stood behind the counter sorting receipts beside a half-finished cup of tea. She was black, perhaps close to 40 broad, through the shoulders and hips, dressed in a dark green sweater and loose black trousers. Her hair was tied back. Nothing about her suggested urgency when she looked at the blood spreading beneath Riku's coat. "You Celeste?" "Yes." He locked the door behind himself. "You have an upstairs room?" "Yes." "Medical supplies?" She glanced at his hand pressed against his side. "Enough." Riku removed a folded stack of notes from his inner pocket and placed it on the counter. "Lock the front. No customers. No calls. If anyone asks, I was never here." Celeste looked at the money for perhaps 2 seconds. Then she pushed it back toward him. "Put that away." Riku thought he had misheard her. "I'm not negotiating. That makes one of us." He studied her properly then. She did not appear frightened. More importantly, she did not appear impressed. Most people who recognized Riku Kuroda reacted before speaking. Some became excessively polite. Others avoided eye contact. A few tried to prove they were not intimidated and overplayed it. Celeste behaved as though he were an injured customer, creating additional work. "You know who I am?" he asked. "I know you're bleeding on my floor." He almost smiled, but the movement pulled at his side. She came around the counter with a small metal case. "Coat off." Riku did not move. Celeste stopped. "If you want treatment, coat off. If you want obedience, find another building." His first instinct was to leave. His second was more practical. The wound was still bleeding. His phone was gone. His driver's status was uncertain. Someone inside his security network knew enough to separate his convoy cleanly. He took off the coat. Celeste cleaned and dressed the injury without asking where it came from. When she finished, she gave him 2 tablets from a sealed packet and pointed toward a narrow staircase behind the dryers. "You can use the back room upstairs." Riku reached for the cash again. "No." "For the room?" "No." "For the inconvenience?" "No." He looked at her. Celeste opened a paper ledger instead. "Name?" He stared at the page. "You're joking." "I'm not. You just said you know who I am. I asked for your name." Something about the distinction irritated him more than it should have. Riku Kuroda. She wrote it down, then turned the ledger toward him. Sign. He did. Next to his name, she stamped the time with a small mechanical device kept beside the register. 12:18 a.m. Riku noticed the security monitor mounted above the office door. The feeds were grainier than he expected. Analog. You should replace those cameras. Celeste closed the ledger. They work. They're 20 years old. They still work. He filed the oddity away without knowing why. Upstairs, the back room held a narrow bed, a desk, and one window facing the service alley. No luxury, no weapons, no obvious communication equipment. It was not the kind of place the Kuroda family normally maintained. That should have warned him sooner. Downstairs, Celeste resumed closing the shop. Across the city, Masanori Kuroda received confirmation that his nephew had survived. Masanori had not planned Riku's death. A dead heir created sympathy police attention and unpredictable loyalties. An absent heir created procedure. Kuroda Maritime had spent 18 months resisting a restructuring that would have restored several old financing channels connected to Shinkai money. Masanori believed Riku's reforms were dismantling safeguards the family had relied upon for decades. He also believed the board was becoming tired of instability. If Riku missed the emergency governance session scheduled for the following morning, Masanori could argue incapacity. If the absence continued, temporary authority could become formal. The plan required discipline. Then, one of his men reported that Riku had been traced to a laundry owned by a foreign woman with no public role in Kuroda Holdings. Masanori made his mistake. Bring him back. What about the woman? Masanori barely considered the question. She runs a laundry. The men arrived at Rowan and Steam at 12:57. Celeste saw them through the front window before they touched the door. 3 men, dark coats. One remained beside the curb, while 2 approached. She reached beneath the counter. Riku heard a heavy mechanical click downstairs. He came out of the room. What was that, fire doors? Celeste's voice carried up the stairwell. Stay there. That instruction alone nearly brought him downstairs. Then, the intercom activated. A man outside spoke first. White Crane returns before dawn. Riku stopped. The phrase had once belonged to an internal Kuroda emergency protocol. It had been retired years ago. Celeste pressed the intercom button. Kenji Morita. Nothing came back. She continued. Legal residence, Kanagawa. Former registration with Minato District Licensing. You entered this property at 12:58 and 14 seconds. Riku stepped halfway down the stairs. The man outside finally answered. Who are you? Celeste ignored the question. Leave. This is Kuroda business. No. Riku had heard men refuse his family before. They normally did it while misunderstanding the consequences. Celeste sounded like someone enforcing consequences already written. The second man moved towards the side entrance. Celeste touched another switch. A reinforced internal shutter dropped across the service corridor. Then headlights appeared outside. A plain gray sedan stopped across the street. 2 people exited, wearing dark civilian coats. Neither displayed weapons. Both carried identification wallets and compact body cameras. The men at the door recognized them. Riku saw the recognition immediately. They backed away. No confrontation, no threats, no dramatic retreat. They simply left. Celeste waited until the sedan remained outside and then released the internal doors. Riku came downstairs. Who were they? The men outside or the people who made them leave both? You already know the first answer. And the second, compliance officers. For who Celeste began gathering the paperwork from the counter as if the question were premature. Riku stepped closer. My people used a retired internal phrase at your door. You knew one of them by legal identity. 2 private officers appeared within minutes. Start explaining. She looked at him. You came here assuming this building belonged to your family. It doesn't. Riku glanced toward the front windows. Then, who protects it? Celeste gave him a look that made the question itself seem incorrect. She walked to a narrow cabinet beneath the office monitor and unlocked it with a small brass key. Inside lay several paper files and a black lacquer seal. A crane was carved into its face. Riku knew the object before she touched it. He had seen it on documents in his grandmother Akiko's study when he was younger. She had stopped using the seal years before her death. He picked it up carefully. "Where did you get this?" "From Riku Kuroda." His attention returned to Celeste. "My grandmother knew you, Celeste. Closed the cabinet. Your grandmother created the arrangement protecting this property." "What arrangement? The Kirin Covenant?" Riku had heard the name once, perhaps twice, buried inside old corporate restructuring files. He had assumed it was another dormant trust established during Akiko's final years. Celeste placed a thin document on the counter. The first page carried the same crane seal. Riku read quickly. "Independent trustee. Protected property. Restricted family authority." Then one clause stopped him. "In the event of disputed executive succession within Kuroda, Maritime Holdings, transfer of controlling authority remained subject to external certification." Riku read it twice. His wound seemed suddenly less important. He looked at Celeste. "You're the trustee?" "Yes." "And Masanori's men just came onto protected property?" "Yes." "Why?" "That is a better question." Riku looked again at his grandmother's seal, then at the woman he had tried to pay for silence less than an hour earlier. He had thought he had stumbled into a forgotten refuge after someone tried to remove him from the board. Instead, his uncle had just sent Shinkai operatives into a place specifically designed to stand outside Kuroda control, and the woman behind the laundry counter held a legal authority capable of interfering with the succession itself. Riku read the succession clause a third time before setting the document down. "How much authority does this give you? Enough to make your uncle nervous." "That isn't an answer. It's the only one you need until I know whether your missing phone has compromised this building." Celeste took the document back, returned it to the cabinet, and locked the door. Riku reached instinctively for the empty pocket where his encrypted phone should have been. If they cracked it, they have contact trees movement, protocols, emergency addresses, and people. Yes, then assume they have those too. She turned off the front lights and left only the machines nearest the rear wall running. Riku watched her move through the shop, checking doors, noting meter readings, pulling several stamped laundry tickets from a metal spindle beside the register. You always record customers by hand. Some things are easier to alter when they exist only on a server. She placed the tickets in an envelope. He looked toward the old camera monitor. The grainy feeds continued without interruption. Another detail he had dismissed. Another reason not to. By 1:30, Celeste had moved him into the small office behind the counter. There was no dramatic command center hidden behind the laundry walls. She used an ordinary laptop connected through a separate wired line and a second machine that appeared old enough to belong in a municipal archive. Riku gave her 3 numbers from memory. Only call the first. Hero, yes. The fixer who sent you here. He's more than a fixer. Celeste waited. Riku corrected himself. He has worked for my family for 23 years. That tells me how long he's been employed, not whether he's safe. Riku almost objected. Then he stopped. Someone had stolen his phone from a vehicle route known only to trusted personnel. The security car had been separated, using an emergency report generated through one of Kuroda's own contracted systems. He had no evidence that trust meant anything tonight. Call no one, he said. Celeste nodded once. That was the first decision he made in her building that she accepted without resistance. They reconstructed the previous 12 hours instead. Riku supplied board schedules, lender meetings, and the internal dispute that had preceded the attack. Celeste asked questions differently from his security people. She did not care who had threatened whom or which captain supported which faction. She wanted dates, voting rights, debt triggers, temporary authority clauses. By 2:15, a pattern emerged. Several directors had received notice of an emergency governance session before Riku's convoy had even been diverted. Celeste turned the screen toward him. This was filed at 11:47. Riku read the timestamp. His sedan had been trapped at 11:53. Masanori prepared the meeting before he knew I'd disappear. Or because he knew. Riku stared at the notice. The wording was careful. No accusation. No declaration of death or incapacity. It merely requested temporary executive authority due to an unspecified interruption in leadership. Clean enough to defend later. If I'm absent tomorrow, Riku said the board can appoint an interim executive and interim decisions. Certain ones can become difficult to reverse, such as debt restructuring, emergency asset transfers, appointment of replacement directors. Celeste leaned back. So he doesn't need your body. No, he needs your chair. The distinction changed the room. Until then, Riku had thought like a man surviving an internal attack. Now he understood the attack was only one component of a corporate transfer already in motion. Celeste opened another file. The Kirin Covenant cannot choose the chairman. Then what does it do? If control is contested, the trustee certifies whether the transfer occurred free of criminal coercion. Riku looked at her. You? Yes. How many shares? Not enough to control the company. Then why would anyone care about your certification? Because Akiko attached it to a special voting condition during the restructuring 16 years ago. Without certification, contested control can be frozen. That answered why Masanori's men had left her door. It also created a worse question. Why would my grandmother give that authority to you? Celeste closed the file. You keep asking the wrong version of that question. Then give me the right one. Ask why she decided your family required an outsider at all. She stood and went to the small sink at the back of the office. Riku let the answer remain unfinished. Pushing her had produced little so far. Watching her had produced more. When she returned, she had removed the dark sweater and replaced it with a plain charcoal cardigan. Her sleeves were pushed to her forearms. A faded scar crossed one wrist, almost hidden beneath a watch. His attention stayed there a second too long. Celeste noticed. She said nothing. Instead, she placed an old corporate memorandum in front of him. Riku recognized the Kuroda maritime letterhead. He did not recognize the signature at the bottom. Celeste Rowan, External Forensic Counsel. He looked up. You worked for us. No, it says Kuroda. It says external. The correction came immediately. 7 years earlier, she explained an overseas shipping partnership had begun showing profits that did not match its operating cash flow. Celeste had been hired by a European lender group to trace the discrepancy. She found undeclared guarantees. Kuroda linked guarantees, some legitimate, some not. Shinkai money, Riku said. Celeste did not answer. She did not need to. What happened? The partnership failed. And I became convenient. Riku knew enough about corporate collapses to fill in the missing language. Consultants blamed, reports challenged, clients disappearing because association became expensive. My grandmother brought you here afterward. No. Again, the correction was immediate. She hired me. Something about it altered his understanding of her more than the resume itself. Celeste did not speak like someone grateful for rescue. Akiko had not saved a ruined woman. She had recruited someone whose conclusions had survived an attempt to discredit them. Riku looked again at the memorandum. You found something my family wanted buried. Some of your family. And Akiko believed you. She believed the numbers. At 3 a.m, an encrypted notification arrived through the Covenant's legal channel. A Kuroda security officer had been located at a private clinic. Alive. Riku recognized the name immediately. Daiichi Sino, one of the men from his second vehicle. Celeste read the message over his shoulder. If he knows who diverted the convoy, he could identify them. He might. You could contact him through the clinic. Riku was already calculating the same thing. If someone was monitoring Daiichi, a message from Riku might expose the surveillance chain. His people had used injured assets that way before, not as sacrifices, but as controlled points of observation. It would be effective. He picked up the secure handset, then put it back down. No. Celeste watched him. They may already be watching the clinic. If I contact him, I confirm he matters. He could give you a name. He also has a concussion and a wife who thinks he drives executives for a shipping company. Riku deleted the clinic reference from the active screen. We leave him out. Celeste did not praise the decision. That made it more useful. She simply returned to the documents. An hour later, she opened a folder Riku had not expected her to possess. Inside were summaries of his restructuring decisions from the previous 18 months. Asset sales, port contractor settlements, credit negotiations, internal compliance reviews. He recognized his own decisions immediately. You've been monitoring me, reviewing the company. That includes me. Yes, you could have mentioned that earlier. You could have mentioned the Shinkai-linked bridge arrangement you rejected in March. Riku stopped. That proposal had been private. Only 6 people had seen it. You know about that. I know you sold 2 profitable warehouses instead of accepting criminally backed refinancing. She turned a page. I also know you authorized compensation after the Shinagawa subcontractor threatened dock workers. Another. And I know you refused 3 recommendations to fully separate Kuroda Maritime from Shinkai obligations. Riku said nothing. Celeste finally looked directly at him. You keep cutting the ropes. She tapped the file. But you refuse to let go of the ship. He disliked the judgment because it was not careless. By dawn, hostility had changed into something more inconvenient. Riku no longer thought Celeste was merely useful. He wanted to know how much she knew. Celeste no longer treated him as a man defined entirely by his inheritance. She had found evidence that he had already paid real prices to resist parts of it. Neither trusted the other, but each had stopped assuming the other was simple. At 6:20, the Covenant printer activated. Celeste crossed the office and removed a formal notice bearing Kuroda Maritime Council's seal. She read the first page, then the second. Riku saw her expression change only in the fact that she stopped turning pages. What she handed him the notice. An emergency succession vote had been moved forward. 48 hours. Below it was a second filing, a petition challenging the Kirin Covenant trustees' independence on grounds of undisclosed personal involvement with the missing heir. Riku read the sentence again, then looked toward the ceiling above them, the room where he had slept, the building no one outside a compromised security chain should have connected to him yet. Masanori had stopped trying to remove Riku from Celeste's protection. Now he was trying to make her protection invalidate her own authority. And whoever had drafted the challenge already knew exactly where Riku Kuroda was. By 8 that morning, Riku's presence at Rowan and Steam had stopped being a secret that needed to be protected and become a fact that could be weaponized. The first article did not name the laundromat. It described an undisclosed private location where the missing Kuroda heir was believed to be staying under the protection of a woman connected to the Kirin Covenant. 20 minutes later, another outlet published Celeste's name. By 10 photographs of her from 7 years earlier were circulating beside headlines about criminal finance. The language was careful enough to survive litigation. Former restructuring attorney, disputed Kuroda connections, questions surrounding trustee independence. None of it directly accused Celeste of wrongdoing. It did not have to. Riku stood behind the counter reading the reports from the secure laptop. Their building contamination. Celeste was sorting legal correspondence into 3 piles, meaning they don't have to prove you worked for Shinkai. They only have to make the board afraid that anything you certify will look compromised. That was already obvious last night. This is different. Yes. She placed another document onto the largest pile. Now it has an audience. The phone rang before Riku could answer. Not the shop phone, the Covenant line. Celeste listened for less than a minute, wrote down 2 numbers, and hung up. Kuroda Maritime's primary lender has requested an emergency liquidity review. Riku checked the time. That should take days. They want preliminary assurance by 4. He knew what that meant. The company was not insolvent, but several shipping assets had been pledged against revolving credit lines. If lenders decided that Kuroda leadership was unstable, they could suspend access to short-term facilities. One missed settlement could trigger technical default clauses across other agreements. Masanori did not need to bankrupt the company. He only needed to create enough financial instability to make emergency leadership appear responsible. Riku asked for the figures. Celeste gave them to him. He calculated silently. 48 hours would solve it. 48 hours was exactly what they did not have. "There is a consortium in Kobe," he said. Celeste looked up. "What kind?" He did not answer immediately. That was enough. "No. They can delay enforcement. How they have influence with 2 participating lenders." "What kind of influence?" "Old obligations." Celeste stopped sorting. "Shinkai obligations." Riku walked toward the office. If the facility freezes today, Masanori gets his crisis. He goes to the board tonight and says my restructuring has endangered payroll fuel contracts and port operations. And if you use Shinkai leverage, we get 48 hours and prove that the legitimate company still survives because you can make a criminal phone call. Riku faced her. "You prefer technical default. I prefer knowing what problem we're solving. We're solving all of them if the company collapses." "No. You're using the tool you know best because it works fastest. That does not make it wrong. It makes the cost easy for you to ignore." The argument followed them into the office. Riku pulled a paper directory from the locked cabinet Celeste had allowed him to use. He found a number he had not dialed in 3 years. Celeste did not try to take it from him. "You call them," she said, "and Masanori gets evidence for the exact argument he's making. He already has the argument. Arguments can fail. Evidence is harder." Riku looked at the number, then called. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. No threats were made. No one mentioned Shinkai. Riku invoked a debt from an older port financing arrangement and asked for enforcement discussions to be delayed until the governance dispute was reviewed. At 3:17, Celeste received confirmation. The lenders had granted 48 hours. Payroll remained protected. Fuel accounts stayed open. The immediate crisis disappeared. Riku placed the notice in front of her. There. Celeste read it once. Then she handed him another document that had arrived at almost the same time, a request from Kuroda Council demanding disclosure of any third-party intervention in the lender negotiations. Riku understood. The solution had left fingerprints. "That was fast," he said. "Masanori was waiting to see whether you would do exactly this." Riku remained standing. For the first time, Celeste saw not embarrassment, but exhaustion in him. "They all depend on it," he said. "On what, this thing, you want me to cut away?" He gestured vaguely, not toward the phone, but toward the entire invisible structure behind it. Port contractors. Retired men whose pensions were never properly documented. Families living in buildings held through companies no bank will touch. Small operators whose debts are guaranteed by people they pretend not to know. You think Shinkai is a room full of men deciding who gets hurt? I think it includes that. It does. He did not defend it. That's the problem. It also became the scaffolding under everything my family refused to formalize. Celeste said nothing. Riku continued. My father taught me that abandoning power does not make power disappear. It gives it to the next man willing to take it. If I walk away from Shinkai, Masanori inherits the same obligations, the same people, the same leverage. So you stay because you believe you're the safer owner. I stay because I know what happens if he owns it. Celeste leaned against the desk. That word is the problem. What word owns? Riku watched her. You keep describing protection as if the only choices are you controlling people or someone worse controlling them. That is sometimes reality, and sometimes it is the argument powerful men use. because they cannot imagine protection that allows other people to decide the terms. He started to answer. She did not let him. You protected payroll today. Good. You also gave Masanori proof that your company still bends when Shinkai applies pressure. Both things are true. Riku sat down. No one in his organization spoke to him that way. Not because they feared his temper, because most of them wanted him to remain inside the system they understood. Celeste had no reason to preserve his comfort. That made the criticism harder to dismiss. The Covenant line rang again, shortly before noon. This time, the caller asked for Celeste personally. She listened, wrote nothing, then told Riku she needed the office. He left without argument. When she emerged 15 minutes later, she carried no documents. Masanori. Yes. What did he offer? My old life. Riku waited. He has records from the European investigation, correspondence, payment logs, selected consulting memoranda. Enough material to make it look as if I spent years designing corporate structures for your family instead of investigating them. He can be disproved. Eventually. That word mattered. Reputation moved faster than correction. What does he want? My certification. Riku understood immediately. Certify his succession and he buries the records. Yes. And if you refuse, he releases them before the board hearing. Riku reached for his coat. Celeste stepped between him and the door. No, I'm not staying here while he blackmails you. What exactly are you going to do? End his access. With what Riku gave her no answer. That Celeste said is the same problem again. He is targeting you because of me. He is targeting me because I hold authority he needs. You were anonymous until I came here, and I chose to let you stay. You didn't know the cost. Neither did you. Riku moved past her toward the counter, then stopped. I can issue a statement. Say I came here without your invitation. Say you gave me no assistance beyond emergency shelter. I take responsibility. Celeste followed him. You do not get to protect my independence by deciding the story for me. I'm trying to keep you out of this. I am already in it. The answer left nowhere for him to go. Earlier, he would have called, security moved her to another property, released whatever statement protected the largest number of assets. Now he asked, what do you want to do? It was a small question. For Riku, it was not a small act. Celeste looked at him for a long moment. We stopped treating each other like liabilities. He nodded. No private rescue plans. Agreed. No calls using my name without asking. Agreed. And if I tell you a decision involving me is mine, I listen. That was as close to trust as either had offered. It lasted 6 hours before Masanori made it expensive. At 7 that evening, the photographs appeared. Riku entering Rowan in steam. Celeste opening the service door. A later image of the upstairs window illuminated. The board filed an immediate challenge to the Kirin Covenant trustees' neutrality. Her certification authority was placed under review, pending the emergency hearing. Riku read the notice twice. They've neutralized you. Celeste did not answer. She walked past the washing machines to the reinforced room he had noticed the first night. This time she unlocked it. Inside were shelves of paper archives, sealed evidence boxes, independent recording equipment, and the original Covenant files bearing Akiko Kuroda's Black Crane. Riku stood in the doorway. You kept all of this here. Celeste removed one thick binder and placed it on the central table. They still think this building was created to protect a Kuroda. Riku looked from the files to the old analog recording units mounted along the wall. What was it created to do? Celeste opened the Covenant to a section he had never been shown. Prove what your family does when it thinks nobody can stop it. Riku read the Covenant section in silence. The language was technical, but its purpose was not. Protected evidentiary site. Independent chain of custody. Non-Kuroda-controlled recording systems. No family payment accepted during an active succession dispute. Mandatory entry logging for protected persons. He looked up. The intake form. Celeste nodded. The money. Yes. The cameras. Yes. Riku turned another page, and the laundry tickets. Celeste pulled open a shallow metal drawer beneath the archive table. Hundreds of manually stamped tickets sat in chronological bundles. Independent timestamps, she said. Ordinary customers before and after every protected event. Harder to rewrite a night when 20 unrelated people carried pieces of the clock home with them. For the first time since entering Rowan and Steam, Riku understood why Akiko had chosen something so mundane. Not a private office, not a family residence, not a corporate archive, a laundry. A place full of receipts, strangers' cameras, cash drawers, timestamps, deliveries, and people with no reason to care about Kuroda politics. Masanori had assumed the building existed to hide him. So had Riku. That mistake had shaped everything that followed. Celeste took out the intake form from his first night. His signature. 12:18 a.m., then the envelope containing the tickets stamped before and after Masanori's men arrived. Then, the isolated camera recording. Riku watched Kenji Morita approach the door, use the retired phrase, and attempt to enter protected property on orders originating from a faction seeking control of Kuroda Maritime. This is enough to challenge the succession. It is enough to prove coercive interference. Then, certify me. Celeste closed the file. No. Riku stared at her. You just proved Masanori tried to use Shinkai personnel to remove me before the vote. I did. So certify that his claim is invalid. I will. And mine, I'm refusing that too. The answer landed harder than anything Masanori had done. Riku stepped away from the table. On what grounds you used Shinkai leverage yesterday to interfere with lender enforcement? To prevent default. I know why. That matters. It matters morally. It does not make the leverage legitimate. Riku looked at the files spread across the table. You're going to let the company fall, because I protected it badly, you know. I'm going to stop pretending the choice is between you and Masanori. That was the part he had not considered. Every strategy he knew assumed somebody eventually won control. Celeste was proposing that neither of them should. The emergency hearing began 3 hours later through a secure hybrid session because too many directors refused to gather at one location. Masanori appeared from Kuroda headquarters in a dark suit surrounded by counsel and 2 senior board members. He looked rested, prepared, certain that the argument had narrowed to Celeste's compromised independence. His attorney began there. The trustee had personally sheltered Riku. She had concealed his location. She had provided strategic support while a succession dispute was active. Her neutrality, they argued, could no longer be presumed. Celeste let them finish. Then she submitted the original Kirin Covenant, not the summary version stored in Kuroda's digital governance system. The executed copy, Akiko's seal, independent witness certifications, protected site provisions, and the chain of custody records from Rowan and Steam. The hearing changed almost immediately. The intake form established that Riku had arrived without prior arrangement. The refusal of payment showed no financial transaction between heir and trustee. The analog footage showed Masanori-aligned operatives arriving less than an hour later. The old security phrase connected them directly to a Kuroda protocol no civilian should have known. The laundry tickets fixed the timeline around unrelated customers. Masanori's attorney tried to call the documentation excessive. Celeste answered with one sentence. Excess is what evidence looks like before powerful people need it. Then she introduced the lender intervention. Riku watched several directors turn toward his screen. Celeste did not shield him. She showed the 48-hour delay, the Shinkai-linked obligation behind it, the exact benefit Kuroda Maritime had received. Masanori almost smiled. You see, he said, even Mr. Kuroda's reform depends on the structure he condemns. Riku could have defended himself. He did not. That is correct. The admission disrupted the room more than denial would have. Riku continued. I prevented a default by using leverage that should never have existed inside a legitimate company. Masanori's expression changed. For the first time, he understood that Riku was no longer trying to prove he deserved the old system more. Celeste filed her decision. She refused certification of Masanori's succession because coercion had contaminated the process. She also refused to certify Riku under the present structure because criminal leverage remained materially attached to corporate survival. Her petition froze the disputed voting shares and placed Kuroda Maritime into independent restructuring until those obligations could be identified and separated. The board could no longer simply choose one Kuroda man over another. The throne inside the company had been removed from the room, but Masanori still had Shinkai. Everyone knew it. If he consolidated the captains, he could pressure lenders, contractors, executives, and port operators from outside the corporate structure. Celeste could interrupt legal succession. She could not dissolve inherited obedience. That part belonged to Riku. His secure phone sat beside him. 3 senior captains had already sent coded confirmations. If he declared himself acting chairman of Shinkai, they would support him. With the Kuroda name behind him, enough factions would fall into line to isolate Masanori within hours. A week earlier, Riku would have called that responsibility. Now he understood what Celeste had meant. Protection could become ownership so gradually that the person exercising it stopped recognizing the difference. He opened a private file he had carried for years. The internal ledger. Debt guarantees, property arrangements, undeclared loans, contractor obligations, names of legitimate Kuroda subsidiaries still tied to Shinkai money. Publishing it would destroy Masanori's ability to hide behind unofficial influence. It would also destroy Riku's own. Celeste saw what he had opened. You don't have to do this today. Yes, if you release that, you cannot become chairman afterward. I know. Kuroda Maritime may remove you permanently. I know. She studied him. You're sure? For once he did not answer for both of them. I'm sure about my part. Then he released the ledger through Kuroda's independent compliance channel and sent authenticated copies to the restructuring panel. The reaction was immediate. Board members demanded review. Lenders requested disclosure. Several Kuroda subsidiaries suspended transactions connected to named intermediaries. And inside Shinkai, the message moved faster than any corporate filing. Riku followed it with a second statement. He renounced hereditary leadership of the organization, not in favor of Masanori, not in favor of anyone. He declared that the Kuroda name would no longer function as an automatic succession claim. Masanori called him directly. Riku answered, "You're destroying your own house." "No," Riku said. "I'm removing the lock." Masanori ended the call. Within hours, 2 captains refused to recognize his claim without Kuroda hereditary legitimacy. A third announced that his businesses would separate from the network rather than inherit exposed liabilities. Others hesitated. Masanori still had loyalists. What he no longer had was inevitability. That was enough. By evening, his corporate succession petition had been rejected. His Shinkai consolidation had stalled. The system supporting both moves had broken in 2 places at once. Riku and Celeste returned to Rowan and Steam after dark. The laundromat was closed. No reporters, no board members, no captains, only machines sitting empty beneath fluorescent light. Riku removed his tie and placed it on the counter. What happens to the Covenant Celeste set Akiko's black seal beside the register. It did what it was created to do. And now, once restructuring begins, it dissolves. Riku looked at her. The legal arrangement that had forced them into the same conflict was ending. So was his succession. So was her anonymity. They had won by destroying the positions that had made both of them useful to each other. For the first time since he entered her laundromat, bleeding and giving orders, nothing required Celeste Rowan to keep Riku Kuroda inside her life, and nothing remained that gave him the right to ask her to. 3 weeks later, Riku Kuroda no longer had an office at Kuroda Maritime. The restructuring committee had moved faster than anyone expected once the internal ledger became public. His resignation was accepted without ceremony. His voting rights were suspended. Several family-controlled assets were placed under professional management, and a large portion of his personal holdings was redirected into employee pension obligations and disputed contractor payments. No one called it punishment. That made it feel more permanent. The company would survive, but not as the inheritance Riku had been trained to receive. His name remained on the building. His authority did not. Masanori's position collapsed more quietly. The board rejected his succession claim after Celeste's evidence established coercive interference. Inside Shinkai, the damage was less clean. Masanori kept loyal men, private money, and several businesses that had always depended more on personal allegiance than family legitimacy. But he could no longer claim inevitability. Once Riku renounced hereditary leadership, the Kuroda name stopped functioning as the answer to every succession dispute. Captains who had waited for the winning relative began making their own arrangements. Legitimate businesses named in the ledger separated themselves from old intermediaries. Some of the networks survived. The Dynasty did not. For Masanori, that was worse than losing to Riku. The throne he had tried to seize had ceased to exist. Celeste paid differently. Her name appeared in newspapers she had spent 7 years avoiding. Old photographs resurfaced. Commentators who had never read her reports debated whether she had been a whistleblower, a compromised advisor, or something between the two. Former clients suddenly remembered her. Journalists waited outside Rowan and Steam for nearly a week. Some called her the woman who had stopped a criminal succession. Others asked why she had remained connected to the Kuroda structure for so long if she knew what it was. Celeste refused interviews. She had learned years earlier that public vindication rarely returned the life that accusation had taken. The Kirin Covenant entered dissolution once independent restructuring formally began. Akiko Kuroda's black crane seal was retired. Celeste held it for several seconds before placing it inside the final archive box. For years, the object had represented responsibility. Now it represented an ending she had never planned beyond. Rowan and Steam was no longer protected ground. The special compliance officers stopped appearing. The analog cameras remained. Celeste saw no reason to replace something simply because its original purpose was finished. One afternoon, Riku arrived while she was clearing the reinforced archive room. He wore no suit, just work trousers, a white shirt, and an inexpensive jacket. Celeste looked at the empty shelves. "You lost no. Your office used to be larger. It was also easier to find." He picked up one of the empty evidence boxes. She allowed him to help. For almost an hour, neither discussed Masanori Shinkai, the board, or the hearings. There was nothing left to solve together. That absence exposed the question both had avoided. When the final box was moved, Celeste sat on the edge of the archive table. "I may leave Yokohama." Riku did not immediately ask her to stay. That was the first thing she noticed. "The covenant is finished," she continued. "I don't need to be here. What would you do?" "I haven't decided." He nodded. The old version of him would already have started solving the uncertainty. An apartment, a position, security, a contract generous enough to make departure irrational. Instead, Riku leaned against the empty shelving. "I accepted a job." Celeste raised an eyebrow. "At Kuroda, no." That surprised her. A group of former dock employees bought a regional freight cooperative that was going under. "You invested, no. Then, what operations director?" Celeste waited. Riku understood why. "There's an elected board above me. Can they overrule you?" "Yes." "Fire you, yes." She almost smiled. "How are you coping poorly?" That earned the smile. He continued. "I could have bought part of it, but I thought I should learn what it feels like to work somewhere I cannot solve disagreement by becoming more important than everyone else." Celeste studied him. That mattered more than an apology, more than the fortune he had surrendered, more than the public renunciation. He had built a limit around himself deliberately, not because the law forced him to, because he finally understood why limits mattered. "I'm turning this room into a legal clinic," she said. Riku looked around. For who port workers? Contract disputes, wage theft, debt arrangements, small things powerful companies assume nobody will fight. So, you're staying. I'm staying for that. He understood the distinction. And me? Celeste looked at him. That question had once been unthinkable from Riku Kuroda. Not because he lacked desire, because asking meant accepting that the answer might be no. She stood. "I'm not becoming part of whatever remains of your family structure." "I know. I don't want drivers I didn't request. You won't have them. No people following me because you decided it was safer. I understand. If something concerns both of us, you ask. Yes, and if I say no." Riku met her eyes. "Then I live with the answer." Celeste stepped closer. There was no declaration, no promise that either of them had become harmless. She knew exactly what Riku had been capable of when power was available to him. He knew exactly how thoroughly Celeste could remove herself when trust was broken. That knowledge made the choice real. "Then we can try?" she said. Months later, Rowan and Steam still looked much the same from the street. Machines turned behind the windows. Workers came in carrying uniforms. But the reinforced room now held a desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a handwritten sign offering evening legal consultations twice a week. The black crane seal was gone. The old mechanical timestamp remained beside the register. One rainy evening, Riku arrived carrying 4 work shirts, stained with grease from a damaged loading system. Celeste inspected them. "Same-day service costs extra. I work here frequently. You work somewhere else frequently. I thought relationships came with benefits." "They do. Laundry discounts, though." She stamped a ticket. Riku looked at the time printed beneath his name. Once a piece of paper like this had helped dismantle the inheritance he believed he was obligated to protect. Now, it simply meant his shirts would be ready Thursday. He folded the ticket into his wallet. Celeste finished counting the register and reached for her coat. Riku waited beside the door. He did not tell her where they were going. He asked whether she wanted to come with him. She let him stand there long enough to remember why the difference mattered. Then she switched off the lights and joined him. Power had once made obedience easy. Trust began only when refusal became safe. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you think really changed them.